Welcome back to the eighth episode of The Union. I am Curtis Valentine. I am with my sister, Carrie Rodriguez. After a short summer break, we are back in full force. Carrie, how you doing?
I'm doing so great. I missed you, Curtis. I missed our lively discussions. I'm so glad to get back at it this Friday.
I agree. It's like we have these conversations, and it does feel like it's just you and I, but people are listening in. And so that's the beauty of the podcast platform. But just finding someone out there who you connect with, who you have similar views with, values, but also some differences. Obviously, we want to have that as well, but different perspectives. You all know Carrie Rodriguez is the president, founder of the National Parents Union. I am the founder of Real Men Teach and with the Progressive Policy Institute. And so we also cover different facets of education, parents, educators, and we are parents, both of us. And so this is why when you see us talking, like, why you feel like you guys are just like sister and brother. Like we're actually, the same age, same background, same everything. And so this is why it works out. So if you find someone like that and you want to start a podcast, go do it. Like, don't wait.
That's the magic. And you're also helping me with a very important transition in my life, which is becoming the wife of a teacher. And I didn't know how much support real men teachers actually need. And boy, we just made it through our first summer. And he's taking on a new subject. He's a middle school teacher, usually science. Now he's taking on math. And I got to thank you, Curtis. You are helping me through this transition so I can support my teacher who lives in my house.
Well, so you got me. You triggered something. I will tell you this: marrying teachers is the best thing you can do. There's so much about. I mean, this is a whole other podcast altogether. Like, hey, particularly men teachers. I love those guys. We love children. So if you're looking for somebody who loves children, boom. We have structured time. In most cases, you have a pretty stable salary, and obviously all those things as well. But I'm all about matchmaking those teachers with good people, and so you all are lucky that educator couple. My wife is an educator as well, so there's something about that. But here we go. We're back. A lot going on in education, students, parents, educators going back to school. But that being said, trying to fight for education for your children is not always the easiest thing in the world, and in some cases it comes with consequences. And Kara, you have a report out of Texas that speaks to this. Let's get right into it.
Yeah, absolutely outrageous situation. And I've got to start off by shouting out my dear friend, my sister in this work, a Chingona in this work from San Antonio, Texas, Maribel Gardea, who is the head of Mindshift Ed. We are so proud to be, a part of her ecosystem. She's an affiliate of the National Parents Union. I mean, she has been a ride or die with us, going to Washington, D.C., marching across this country. She showed up in New York City with me. You name it. Like this is part of my crew here. And the reason she is because she is a woman who not only stands up and fights for her own children, but is called upon by mothers and families across her community, across San Antonio, across Texas. Frankly, she provides advice for organizations across this country out of solidarity because she is such an incredible leader. And she's also the mother of a child who is medically complex, which is part of her journey. She's also a Mexican-American woman who had the audacity of earlier this week going to her local school board meeting and raising some pretty significant issues around a local school board that had been given a D rating by the state of Texas. Really a lot of trouble academically, not communicating with parents, issues with bullying, safety issues. So she was actually called in by other mothers and parents in the communities who felt like they were not being heard by the school board. She goes out, she shows up, helps them to organize, speaks out, and literally went just a few seconds over her time in public comment. Not because she was being rude, not because she was being disrespectful, but because she wanted to make sure that the message she was conveying was heard in both English and Spanish, because there are monolingual Spanish speakers in that community that deserve to be a part of the community. And frankly, it was part of the issue she was talking about this school district not effectively communicating with parents. And so she was very aggressively manhandled, forced out of the room, slammed into handcuffs, where she is asking, she's just saying like, hey, is there a policy that I violated? I understand I went over time, but and Curtis, I have to be honest with you. I have marched to school boards in cities and towns and communities across this country, hundreds of them with parents. I have never seen a parent be treated so aggressively, slammed into cuffs, not being told why she was detained. She was held for 3 hours at district offices and then sent to the county jail, Bexar County Jail, overnight, held on $9,000 bail. And it took us literally 18 hours to figure out where she was, because obviously, again, because of the larger context of what we're dealing with in this country, we were deeply concerned about whether or not they were questioning her immigration status, even though she's a U.S. citizen, because we've seen that happen in other places. But this was absolutely outrageous and ridiculous. And frankly, what is terrible but wonderful is seeing so many parents from across the country standing up in solidarity with Maribel and saying, we will come to San Antonio. We will stand up with you. How can we donate to a legal fund? What can we do? But again, this has such a disgusting, chilling effect on parents that are speaking up for the right reasons. And this is in so much conflict with what we tell parents every single day. We want you to engage. We want you to use your voice. We want you to pay attention. We want you to hold the system accountable. And then when we show up and you don't like what we have to say, you slap us in handcuffs. Absolutely ridiculous and outrageous. And frankly, we've got to be really paying close attention to what's happening here, because this is not where we want to go. And frankly, this is why parents and families and communities shut down on school systems.
Well, we want to thank Maribel for stepping up in the first place, and well wishes to her family, those who look up to her members of her organization, but parents who look to other parents to speak up, particularly parents, from certain communities that, quite frankly, are not invited in. And we know this already. I was on the school board for 10 years. We would have our public sessions, and there were certain parents who didn't come, quite frankly. And when you talk to them, they felt like, well, the time of the meeting wasn't really conducive to certain types of parents, single parents who would have time to, make time for their kids, parents whose language, English is a second language, all those things. But then when you have someone do it, and this happens, I will tell you, some districts try to use this as an example, And I'm so glad that you all are there to say that this will not stand, this will not take place. For those who are listening, how can others help support her?
Yeah, the most important thing you can do is you can go to their website, mindshifted.org. It is in San Antonio. You can donate directly to the organization. They're going to incur likely some legal costs around this. So I know that there are organizations across the country that are contributing. We're doing everything we possibly can to make sure that she has all the resources and everything that she needs. But Curtis, this is really, just such a scary moment for parents that are trying to speak up, trying to do the right thing. And frankly, if this doesn't give you pause, seeing, we saw folks who were trying to ban books, who were yelling and screaming and threatening and literally like threatening to kill members of school boards. And those folks didn't even get a civil trespass. Mm-hmm. Could you imagine standing there, very polite? And anybody who's listening to this podcast who knows Maribel, because she is very well known and well respected in the education community, knows that she conducts herself with dignity and grace. There was no acting a fool, the way that we've seen some folks do in the past.
Yeah.
The idea that this would rise to criminal trespass, and it's all on video. So I encourage people, Google it, show your support, go to mindshifted.org, make a donation, even if it's a small donation. Like, these are folks who are really out there doing the work. And it's not just about, this particular moment. Also think about the sacrifice that Maribel makes as a mother of a child with special needs, away from her child for almost 24 hours. Like, just because she was standing up and doing the right thing. It's just outrageous on so many different levels. I really want to encourage people to show up and show their solidarity for her, for sure.
Thank you so much for saying that. And for those wherever you live, there's back to school coming. You have back to school nights. School boards are sort of coming back together again. So the first school board meetings are taking place around the country. We hope that what you're hearing, both informs you but inspires you. Even if you're going to a school board meeting to listen, I know jumping out, some folks testifying may be a little early. But go, just show your face, introduce yourself, so that people know who you are, and then go. And sometimes you don't have to have an agenda. Just say, who you are, where your child goes to school. Are there any programs, any things that you're working on with your children? Not only testimony has to be a request, but those times when you do, when you have a demand, when you have something you want to bring forward, there's a item on the agenda that you're there. But get used to it, get your children used to it. It's like a muscle. But thank you so much. Carrie, you all, again, as parents are really, getting back into school. And a lot of what school looks like this year is different from last year for a lot of different reasons. Some education related, some economy related. And so what are you hearing from parents as they're trying to get ready to go back to school, trying to bring their finances together, their time together? What are you hearing from parents about what they're concerned about moving into this new school year?
Well, I got to tell you, Curtis, I'm very worried because it is tough out there and it is a battleground this year. And, being in the parent advocate space, being in the education space, it seems like every single year I get asked the same questions by the national media. Back to school, what are parents worried about? What are we concerned about? And I have to tell you, what I'm seeing this year is more intense than I have seen in my last 10 years of doing this work out in the field as a direct parent advocate, directly connected to parents and families and educators. Because what we're seeing is because of the economic conditions and people feeling that tariffs are starting to hit them. Because if you go out to Walmart, to Target, you go to Kroger, you go to H-E-B, wherever you are, you're seeing for yourself with your own eyes how expensive things are. Everything from haircuts to Lunchables to notebooks to backpacks to sneakers to all of the things, they are going up. And we actually have some real stats. So if you're just feeling it and saying, is this just me? No. We can tell you the Amazon Prime Day event, which was July 8th through 11th, sales of school supplies, they were up 175% because parents knew on August 1st, we were going to see these tariff increase and they were trying to get in before the buzzer. So now we're in this period of time, Curtis, where we're getting those back to school lists and parents are filled with anxiety and frankly dread about getting these lists from teachers, from schools saying, oh my gosh, I've got 3 pages worth of supplies that I've got to come up with. And we're seeing this conflict. And it's coming from a place of being very worried as a parent right now that you're not going to have the ability to get your kid what they need to be successful in class and you're going to let the teacher down. So we're seeing these conflicts a lot on social media where it's parent versus teacher saying, I'm not buying all these classes. I'm not buying you the Kleenex and the paper towels and the Clorox wipes and all of the extra things that help a classroom to run that you actually need. I'm only taking care of my kid. And how dare you? It's coming out in that way. And what is making me very worried, having watched this landscape over the last 10 years, is the head-to-head conflict. And we're starting the year off in a very negative place because of the temperature being brought up so significantly on parents and frankly on teachers who are just trying to do it, like ask for a little bit of help because teachers are going to go out there and try to get to Costco and fill up the room themselves if they can't make it happen. Then we're going to make it happen. But I'm very worried about these relationships and what's happening here.
Well, I mean, this is where the parent-teacher conversation happens. And so for the teachers that I talk to, the men teachers, other teachers we engage with, 90% of them spend their own money on their students in their classrooms. Because saying that, we're not going to have the supplies and we're not going to have the glue and the things the school district can't provide because they're losing money, is not going to keep them from serving their students. Because they know if they don't have the tools to be successful, it impacts them, it impacts their students, it impacts how the school sees them as educators. My children grew up Montessori. So the Montessori list was, you say 4 pages, it was 8 pages. Because they're doing a lot of manipulatives in order to, educate students. And they can't always afford that. And so you're having teachers squeezed, teachers who are parents, who are trying to pay for their own children and pay for their classroom. And so for those who are out there, you have a friend who's a teacher, support them. There are ways that you can engage to help support and sponsor things that are happening in their classroom. And so I'm just concerned because the economy is pushing in on the school districts, on the parents, and now also on the teachers.
And here's the other thing too. I'm concerned about this aspect of what's happening with the economy and the temperature coming up. I'm also concerned about our schools and whether or not, like, we've been talking a lot about funding formulas and money coming down from the feds and Title I funding and Title III funding and Title II funding, all of these different funding sources, right? I don't know whether or not our schools, and I'd love to hear this fall. So I'm going to put this challenge out to all of our folks in the education space. I want to hear you guys start to talk about the impact of tariffs on school budgets. We're going to talk about declining enrollment because that's another aspect of what's happening here. But when it costs more money to literally physically run the school, where energy costs are up, when the cost of paper, the cost of printing, all of these different things, I don't know about you, Curtis, but I haven't seen enough conversation about kind of the intersections of all these different aspects of school finance and where this money is going to come from if the cost of paper goes up by 30%, if the cost of those printer cartridges goes up by 65%. Like, that money's got to come from somewhere. And we know that, unfortunately, it ends up really directly impacting our kids in the classroom.
Yeah. I hope people are listening and understanding that when we talk about education, Carrie and I are talking about what happens in the classroom, teacher-student connection, but also everything else that happens before they get into the classroom. And a lot of cities, Washington, D.C., which I'm more adjacent to, Baltimore City, other places, where they actually use public transportation to move students around. And when cities have to crunch in on budgets and bus routes get impacted and payment to not the school bus drivers, it's a public bus driver who's doing the public transportation because the district is relying on that. And the routes are shortened. That impacts school schedules. That impacts whether your child, who's, in some cases have enrollment across the district, which is great. We say we want to give access to all the students, can't get from one side of the city to the other in time for school. Right? They get up earlier because in impacting their sleep schedules, all these different things. These are all the things that impact education that a lot of us oftentimes overlook because we're looking directly at the teacher-student relationship. We're looking at the entire ecosystem, and this particular economy right now is closing on a lot of us. When it comes to enrollment, I think, Carrie, thank you for that segue. At the same time that we're dealing with the economy, we're looking at a school system, particularly public school system, that is seeing a continued drop in enrollment. It started a little bit before COVID, but accelerated during COVID. And so right now, 1.2 million students less are enrolling in public schools than they did just 2 years ago. We said it again. That's 1.2 million students less than they were 2 years ago. And that comes from, and we're looking at, data is showing that that's actually going to go down even further in the next 5 years. And so we're looking at even more students. This is an additional nearly 3 million students we're going to lose. Where does that come from? I'm glad you asked. Some has to deal with just the fact that, hey, Americans are having less children, that the birth rate is down. Again, that's something that also up to the economy too, which I think we can talk about also. But we're also seeing parents who started during COVID, but it's continued doing more homeschooling. In some cases, in a small bit, students are in private schools. But these are things that we're seeing happening every day. Now, what does this mean? This means that districts like the one I helped run for 10 years, are going to see their budgets drop because every student that's not in that school system is impacting the overall budget for that school district for those who are still there. And so for those of you public school parents out there, you're wondering why certain programs are being cut, certain after-school programs are being cut, certain before school programs are being cut. That is impacted because you have enrollment drops across the district. And this is sort of disproportionately impacting certain kids. So, white students account for the largest share of the overall decline. A loss of nearly 2 million kids from 2019 to 2023. That's an 8% drop, particularly in white parents. Black enrollment fell by 250,000 students between 2019 and 2023. And so we're seeing this. It's disproportionately impacting these things. Again, as I mentioned before, when you don't have students, you're dealing with money's being cut. But this also is being compounded because a lot of the COVID money that was injected into systems is being lost. So you're losing money because of COVID. Money's being shut down. You have less students coming in. You have the economy cutting in. All these things are impacting students. And right now doesn't seem like it's slowing down, Carrie.
Yeah, and I gotta say, like a lot of people don't understand, like their education finance is like really complicated, and frankly, the average person is not thinking very deeply about, well, how do schools get funded? They don't fund the building. It's based on butts and seats. So in October, there is a day where all the kids are counted, and when we talk about declining enrollment, the thing that puts the fear of God in superintendents and principals and folks that have to deal with the actual like resource allocation in schools is that day, and knowing that the kids you anticipated were going to be in there and you were kind of forecasting out so that you could make a plan for the year aren't going to be there. And when that happens and those kids aren't counted, that per pupil number that folks get from the state that actually provides the resources for the class, that doesn't come. But the building itself still has to operate. And I've got to say, another piece of this, Curtis, that is really important for us to understand is because of, again, the external politics of what's happening out there. Latino kids are not going to be showing up at schools in the numbers that you think they are this year, because you have things like we just over the summer, we were talking about situations where ICE was showing up a block or two away from schools, arresting and detaining special ed kids that were actually U.S. citizens and were subsequently let off. But that, again, has a chilling effect. If you know that your kid, just by having them walk down the street to school, could potentially be opening up a door to be detained, that safety is the number one concern for American families. And what does that mean? We've got to understand what that means. That means if a kid cannot walk down the street and walk into a classroom and have a parent know that that child's going to come back to me in one piece, healthy, whole, beautiful, the way we sent them, they're not going to roll the dice. And in the current political context, people are making that calculus. And that is going to have a direct impact on what we see playing out in school budgets this year. So the confluence of all of these things, whether it's, the direct education funding that we see from the U.S. Department of Education, whether it's states having to make some critical decisions as the result of the big, beautiful bill and less money going to education, less money from Medicaid, which is the fourth largest funder of public schools, and the fact that kids aren't showing up in the building out of fear and a whole host of other reasons. This is a tornado of trouble coming down the hill for our public school system.
Yeah, and I don't want to add insult to injury, but we're also seeing through the big beautiful bill and other federal sort of policies coming out of and executive orders coming out of the White House that there's an expansion, a growth in trying to use public school funding for private education. You can't get around it. States are expanding it. There were states who had it before, were already doing this. And they're expanding. If we're looking at places like Indiana, right? So Indiana has a signature voucher program called this Choice Scholarship. Around 76,000 students received these vouchers last school year, an increase of about 6,000 students from the year before. So you're seeing these increases. But that program cost the state of Indiana nearly $500 million to do that, right? And the average voucher recipient came from a household with just over $100,000 in income. So here's the thing. You have this policy coming from the federal government that's, at least on its face, trying to say that we want to give Black and brown students a way out of failing public schools and into private education. But we're also seeing that the majority of folks who use it are people who are not coming from low-income families. At the same time, 1/3 of Indiana counties don't have a voucher accepting private school within their borders. And so you have this idea of, not really touching the people you say you want to touch, but also the access to these schools is just not there. And so you sort of this promise that you all have is not being fulfilled for the students you say you want to give, because they just don't have the schools there. And so according to Chalkbeat, thank you for this analysis of state data, shows that the voucher use is lower in rural areas than in urban areas. And so you think about this, about access and about opportunity, it's just not there. And so as you have this expansion and this sort of withdrawal or exodus, at least from policy side from the federal government public school systems, the people who they say they're trying to help are just not being helped. And so this is something we want to keep an eye on. We're going to keep an eye on this all school year. We want to hear from those folks Did you get a voucher? Did you apply for a voucher? Is it something you have access to? Is what they promised actually coming to fruition? Because right now, based on what we're seeing in places like Indiana, a $500 million check to the state, when only one third of the state doesn't have access to these places. That's something we were concerned about. We're going to be tracking throughout the entire school year.
Yeah, and I got to tell you, Curtis, you're concentrating on the inputs, which I think are really important and critical, and we're going to stay on top of it. I'm here to ask, where's the beef? For $500 million, I want to know, what am I getting for my $500 million? Because what I have a problem with as a parent is understanding whether or not we're getting some bang for our buck out of this money. And the fact that we are watching people play real fast and loose around accountability for academic outcomes, like that's one hell of a gamble to say, hey, we're gonna try these private options. I don't know whether we're going to be preparing our kids for the future, for the jobs and economy of the future, whether or not they are going to be prepared to actually enter in a global economy. That's one hell of a gamble. And for folks like you and I represent, we don't have that safety net of a trust fund to go back and run daddy's company if this all doesn't work out. So the fact is, we have to continue to fulfill that promise that when you graduate, or you're given a certificate saying that we have done our job in providing you an education. And if you want to say, hey, we're going to do it through vouchers, that's great. But that certificate of completion that you are done with education in the United States better come with the promise that you are ready for jobs, you are ready for college. And I haven't seen a lot of data that gives me a lot of confidence that all these vouchers and these programs that we are pouring so much money into, $500 million in one state alone, that we are actually getting the results. So I'm going to be tough on that. I'm going to be asking where the beef is. I want to see what the actual outcomes are for kids, and whether or not this was just kind of a pie in the sky kind of rolling of the dice saying, let's experiment. I'm not experimenting with my kids. I want to guarantee that when they leave, they're going to be prepared for success and to access economic mobility.
So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Those who are watching in, you can see we're fired up for this school year. We have a lot of stuff we're tracking. We want you all to text us, inbox us, topics you want to hear. This year, we're going to be bringing guests in, folks who are in this work. And so when you see a new face on the screen, please know that they're also talking about what they're doing in their space to impact and ensure that students across this country are getting a quality education.
And we want to hear from you. If you want to be a guest, come on. We want to hear from you. Get in this conversation and get in the mix. Parent,
educator, entrepreneur, someone is really working on education to inform what's happening. Please let us know. I will say this. This is the year, and it's something I saw just early before we wrap up, Carrie. Our COVID kindergartners are now middle schoolers. So those who are in 2020 were coming into kindergarten in 2020. Now these folks are getting into elementary and middle school. So those teachers who have those students, we know how important this is. You know, we're 5 years later, and these students are getting back into the school system, trying to close gaps. Please, we pray for our middle school educators, elementary educators who are out here trying to really improve education for a class of students who really were not served really well during the pandemic. Let's just be honest with us. And so we want to all hands on deck around those students. Pray for those parents who are actually going out to college. My son is a graduating senior from high school. You know, the applications are coming through. What's happening in higher ed, we'll touch on in our future topics. But as we wrap up, any final thoughts, Carrie, before we let these folks off the hook?
I'm not letting anybody off the hook this year. So I hope we don't get ready. We stay ready over here. But let me tell you something. As we go back to this conversation and all of these conversations in education, we're going to remind all of you that our kids are not broken. Our kids are beautiful. They are whole. They are still ready for innovation, for new ideas. They are going to be brilliant and bright, and we are going to have a wonderful future. And for folks, especially, I get a little nervous about this COVID kindergartner conversation, because it almost in some spaces starts off as if our kids are broken and we've handed off these dysfunctional kids. Our kids are different. They've been handed challenges, but they are showing up at school. They are wanting to learn, and we're not giving up on it. That's our jobs as the grown-ups, to figure out how to help them and walk with them through this challenge. But there's nothing wrong with our babies. They are still as bright and beautiful, and I am still as hopeful as I have ever been that we are going to do right by this generation.
On that note, thank you so much, Carrie. We're back next week, next Friday, another episode of the Union Pod. So glad that you all are joining us today. Like, share, comment. See you next week.